Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is January 14th, 2026. Will a wealth tax truly hurt state revenues? What South American country does Donald Trump have his sights on next? Who do you trust more, a human doctor or a corporation's guessing machine? ICE agents shot a woman dead. What really happened? Do you know if your neighbors are ICE agents? Would you like to find out? Bombings, blockades, invasions, and now possibly war. How long must the people of Cuba suffer? What citizens does the US government think don't matter? Why would 4 DOJ top officials all quit at once? Is Mark Zuckerberg planning a nuclear power plant for your backyard? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
Billionaire's Mouthpiece searches for reasons to avoid taxing billionaires. January 10th, 2026 via Z Network. The Washington Post, which exists mainly to serve the interests of its mega-billionaire owner Jeff Bezos, unsurprisingly thinks taxing the wealth of billionaires is a bad idea. Its January 1st editorial warning California not to institute a tax on extreme wealth, headlined "California will miss billionaires when they're gone," illustrates that when you're telling the boss exactly what he wants to hear, you don't have to think very hard. California is considering a referendum on whether to impose a one-time wealth tax on the state's billionaires. The paper's hot take: many progressives think of taxation the way teenage boys think about cologne. If some is good, more must be great. The paper offers PayPal's Peter Thiel and Google's Larry Page, both of whom have threatened to leave California, as poster children for why you shouldn't subject billionaires to a wealth tax. Both highly dubious examples. Thiel is well known for his use of an absurd tax loophole. He put 1.7 million shares of PayPal stock, which he valued at 0.1 cents apiece, so $1,700, into a Roth IRA, and by 2021 that had grown through reinvestment into a $5 billion nest egg. In 2026, it's likely the bulk of his $25 billion fortune. A Roth IRA means that if he waits until 27, when he turns 59, he won't have to pay any taxes on it at all. This is precisely why people want a wealth tax, because the tax code makes it easy for oligarchs like Thiel to pay little or nothing in income tax. Page is also known for tax shenanigans, parking much of his wealth in a charity that distributes almost none of its wealth to disclosed recipients. When ProPublica analyzed tax filings from the super-rich, Page had one of the lowest effective federal income tax rates amongst prominent billionaires. To illustrate the fiscal danger California would be putting itself in with a wealth tax, the Post cited the example of New Jersey billionaire David Tepper, who blew a hole in the state budget by moving to Florida. That's according to an article from Philadelphia public TV station WHYY, which said in 2016 that while the amount that Tepper paid in taxes last year is unknown to the public, a resident that rich could pay tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars in income taxes if they paid New Jersey's highest tax rate, 8.97%. The only way Tepper would have paid hundreds of millions in Jersey state income tax would be if he were declaring several billion in income a year, but Tepper reportedly made $750 million in 2016, which would be $67 million at the top tax rate, which he wouldn't pay anyway since he's a hedge fund manager and benefits from a special tax loophole designed just for them. In any case, Tepper moved back to New Jersey in 2020, so it's not clear what kind of object lesson he should serve for California. Was his 2016 move representative of a broader problem of the flight of the wealthy from New Jersey? It's hard to see how, as the state has the highest concentration of millionaires in the country, up from third highest in 2014. This is a perennial problem with the oligarchy's don't touch our money arguments. They want to claim that they'll run away from high taxes, but they like living in high-tax states. The LA Times' Michael Hiltzik pointed this out years ago, responding to a similar editorial in the Wall Street Journal. The Journal leaned heavily on a study by 2 economists at the right-wing Hoover Institution, Joshua Rao and Ryan Hsu, who the paper said found that the likelihood of a wealthy resident moving out of California increased by about 40% following an income tax hike on the ultra-wealthy. Hiltzik noted that the actual percentage of rich people moving out was quite small, increasing from 1.5% to 2.125%, and more importantly, that Rao and Hsu only looked at outgoing multimillionaires, ignoring the fact that more affluent people were moving to the state than moving away. More than 6 years later, the Post is still citing Rao and Hsu, still talking about that same 2013 California tax hike and the imaginary exodus of plutocrats it caused. I don't know why they should be any more convincing than they were a decade ago, but then the editorialists have only have to convince one reader that they're doing their best to protect his fortune. Contrary to what the Washington Post believes, I am certainly not going to miss billionaires when they're gone. And in fact, I hope that we get rid of them pretty quickly. I want them to be gone faster. And I don't just want them to move out of my state or out of my country. I want them in the ground. Or perhaps a more genteel approach would be to have all of their assets seized by the state and by the people, and their wealth redistributed back to the people from which it came. Of course, billionaires only exist through theft. They steal the excess value of the labor that working individuals generate and keep it for themselves. They don't create jobs, they don't create wealth, and they certainly don't earn a single cent of their money. They own, and that's all that they do. Owning is not a job, and owning does not create wealth. Working does. All wealth comes from working through labor or through the natural produce of the earth, that kind of thing. It does not come from owning. Owners only steal wealth that others generate for them. So the working class toils, and they create wealth through their labor. And that wealth is then taken from them by the capitalists, and their wages is only a small percentage, crumbs of their labor, returned to them. I don't want to even say as a gift, as a guarantee of their compliance. Of course, the working class outnumbers the billionaires like, 100 million to 1 maybe. And so in order to maintain their wealth, they need to be able to get it both by exploiting the workers and then by, again, receiving profits from the consuming of goods and services that the workers do. So especially in the United States, which is a predominantly consuming society. So the workers in America buy stuff that they do or do not need, and then the profits generated, rather than going back to the workers who created those goods, goes to the pockets of billionaires. So they have to give the workers a bit in order for the workers to keep spending. And in order to keep the workers in line and to keep them begging for scraps of the food that they made. So, no, I'm not going to miss billionaires when they're gone. And I understand that the article means that they're going to miss them in terms of the tax revenue that the billionaires allegedly create through living in the state. Although the article itself called bullshit on that, and I'm going to reinforce that. As we saw very clearly illustrated in the article, these threats of, we're going to leave, we're going to move, don't hold water. The billionaires prefer to live in the so-called blue states and in higher tax states because they like the amenities that they get there. Yeah, it's all well and good for you to pay less taxes if you move to like Texas from California, but at a certain point, if you're worth $25 billion, what can't you afford anyway? So, the services that can be provided by the state of California are by far outclass the services that are provided by the state of Texas. And so, they'll happily pay for that trade-off. Plus, more and more are moving into states like California or New Jersey and are staying there. So, they're not really leaving. Certainly not the way the article says it is. These arguments, though, are designed to keep us compliant, and in order for us to accept laws and regulations that keep the ruling class on top and the working class at the bottom. It makes us afraid to lose what we have if the billionaires leave, and it creates this false dependency on the billionaires. Of course, the billionaires depend on us for everything because they don't make anything of themselves. They don't make any of their own money. We make all their money for them. So they need us. We don't need them. They don't contribute anything. So, before however we can completely eradicate the billionaires, which would be fantastic, and we should really get on that, we need to tax the hell out of them. Again, that's all money that belongs to the people anyway. It was created by the people, and we need to take it back from them. So the government forcing them to pay what's their fair share and what we're owed is only right. It's how we're going to be able to pay for good schools, good roads, good infrastructure, building trains, high-speed rail, etc., etc. Of course, really, most of our tax dollars go to like bombing Iran or whatever else we're going to be doing tonight, but a military-industrial complex and all that. But the billionaire class does need to be forced to pay into society, which it leeches off of, because the owning class are leeches. They don't work. They don't do anything to contribute to society. They just bleed off it like leeches. And that goes for landlords too, of every shape and size. So, I'm not going to miss them when they're gone. We do need to tax the hell out of them. Hopefully tax them into oblivion. Wouldn't see me shed a tear over that. They don't contribute to society. They're not going to go anywhere, as much as they pretend to. And again, it's all because it reinforces this belief that your average American is just a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, right? We're like, oh, well, we can't tax the super rich because one day that might be us. When in reality, we're a temporarily well-off homeless person. So, tax the rich. You're never going to be part of them. They don't want you to be part of them. And if we're being honest, they're social leeches. And they deserve the exact same thing that a leech gets. Dump them in salt, kill them. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Colombian rebels must unite to fight U.S., guerrilla leader says. January 10, 2026 via Sky News. Despite a 2016 peace deal between Bogota and rebels, sporadic fighting continues in some rural areas between the army and rebel splinter groups. The head of the largest dissident branch of the former Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, guerrilla group has called on rebel groups to come together to fight U.S. interventionism. Nestor Gregorio Lozada, better known as his pseudonym Ivan Mordisco, stated in a video message that the move was necessary to counter any U.S. intervention in the region. The call came after President Donald Trump responded that a possible operation targeting Colombia sounds good to me when asked if he might order U.S. military action against the country. He has also called Colombia's President Gustavo Petro a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. Those comments caused alarm after a U.S. incursion in neighboring Venezuela left the country's President Nicolas Maduro in U.S. custody. However, unlike Venezuela, Colombia's military has strong ties to the U.S. Sky News' senior foreign producer Dominique Van Heerden explained, "The American military has a well-established and strong working relationship with the Colombian military. This is a partnership that has been strengthened in recent years, despite political differences between the current administrations. The U.S. military has a near-zero working relationship with the Venezuelan military, especially in recent years. The Colombian military goes to great lengths to try and stop cocaine production in the country, facing an uphill battle, while the Venezuelan military was accused of playing a significant role in the transportation of cocaine through Venezuela and showed no willingness to tackle the problem. Unlike Venezuela, where any power struggles have intended to be an intragovernmental, Colombia suffered from an armed conflict between the government and various rebel groups, including FARC, for over 50 years. A highly contested peace deal between Colombia's government and FARC was reached in 2016. Then President Juan Manuel Santos pushed the deal through with dozens of changes after Colombians rejected a previous peace deal weeks earlier in a referendum. Despite the deal, sporadic fighting continues in some rural areas between the army and splinter groups which reject the 2016 deal. Colombia's incumbent president is himself a former rebel fighter and the country's first left-wing president. Mr. Petro was elected in 2022 on promises to bring total peace to Colombia and end the armed conflict that has killed more than 450,000 people. Carlos Ruiz Massieu, Special Representative for the UN Secretary General and head of the UN verification mission in Colombia, has sounded the alarm over resurging violence. He warned that in some parts of the country, the situation had deteriorated with the arrival of armed actors who had taken advantage of the state's limited presence and sought control over illicit economies. It is those actors, not the Colombian military, that President Trump is likely to target if he does decide to turn Operation Colombia from soundbite to reality. It's interesting to me that this article frames Venezuela and the Venezuelan military as being responsible for drug trafficking, because there is no trace of cocaine or fentanyl or any other drugs being smuggled from Venezuela to the United States. Especially some of our bigger drug sources, like heroin, largely came from Afghanistan, being trafficked by the U.S. military instead of the Venezuelan military. And we don't seem to be all that broken up about it here in the States. Otherwise, we'd be, bombing Fort Bragg and taking out whoever's in charge of that and throwing them into prison in New York. So the idea that, Colombia has been trying to fight the drug trafficking, but Venezuela hasn't, is bullshit. And much like Mexico, Colombia's drug problem is not Colombia's drug problem. It is America's drug problem that Colombia is being forced to deal with. The cartels and other agents in Colombia are, serving U.S. demand and U.S. criminal interest in drugs. The Colombians aren't the ones who are using the drugs, just like the drug war in Mexico isn't about Mexicans who are using drugs or demanding drugs or anything else. It's the U.S. sponsoring the drug trade for recreation and, in many cases, in the pursuit of alleviating the pains of poverty and neglect from the state. And the Colombians and the Mexicans are the ones who pay the price for that. It is not that, imagine an apartment in which one guy is a habitual drug user and everybody else in the apartment has to deal with the comings and goings of this violent drug addict. That's a situation that Colombia and Mexico are in, with the United States being the violent drug addict. The guns that the cartels get are often stolen from the U.S. military by U.S. soldiers and sold to the cartel. Obama himself directly sold weapons to the cartel, and it was a Fast and Furious scandal. So, this isn't the idea that, Colombia is actually fighting the drug problem, Venezuela isn't. If we wanted to fight the drug problem, we would actually deal with the drug problem at home rather than placing all the blame and such on Colombia and on Venezuela and on immigrants. I digress. The president of Colombia is a really interesting guy, and I think it's very telling that he's an enemy of Donald Trump. And this is a guy who is a democratic socialist guerrilla rebel in Colombia. He legitimately has, guerrilla fighting experience. So, he made the news earlier last year when he said that he was willing to defend the Palestinian people, and he was going to commit, 40,000 troops to protecting the Palestinian people if he could, and that he personally volunteered to lead them with his own personal military and militia experience. So, a really interesting guy. He cut off coal sales to Israel. I do think there's more that Colombia could be doing for the Palestinian cause and that they could have been doing earlier. Gustavo Petro is, in some ways, a bit more liberal than I would like, and probably more than you would like. But we can't all be perfect. We gotta play the cards that we're dealt, and I think that Petro is in my personal opinion, one of the best guys that we've got south of the border. Well, south of the Mexican border. I think probably the best guy south of the American border is Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. But my own understanding of all of the interworkings of Latin American politics, of all the countries that entails, and all of their very complex social and political systems, is definitely nowhere close to expert level. So this is understand my own American impressions of and surface level understanding of a lot of these guys. Maybe a little bit lower, a little bit deeper than surface level, but I'm certainly no expert on Latin America. I think Gustavo Petro is pretty decent, and certainly not the kind of guy that we would be happy, not that we'd ever be happy to see Trump bomb or attack another country, but certainly out of all of them, Colombia and Petro are two that we would really not like to see. And he's the first left-wing president of Colombia, at least in a very long time, and he's one of 3 remaining standing left-wing leaders in Latin America. Without Maduro, we have Nicaragua, which is having its own difficulties, Cuba, which has been under constant U.S. assault for 66 years or so. We'll be talking more on that in a moment. And we have Colombia. Brazil is maybe number 4 on there, depending on the day. But Gustavo Petro is a decent guy, definitely not a dictator, democratically elected. He is a guy who, and I don't believe there's any controversy over his election, unlike Maduro. Petro was, just won the election. And yeah, now back onto more what the article was about. Colombia has had a really interesting history, again, of guerrilla warfare since, I think, 1948. 450,000 people killed. And one of the big sponsors of this guerrilla warfare is, believe it or not, the Coca-Cola company. Because a lot of coca, the plant, comes from Colombia and gets processed and is actually an ingredient in Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola runs paramilitary death squads in Colombia in order to keep their production going. Coca-Cola no longer has actual cocaine in it, just both cocaine and the coca extract used in Coca-Cola come from the same plant. It's no different from maple leaves and maple syrup. They're 2 very different products. So, Coca-Cola and these other American companies have very deep influence in this country, ties to the cartels, ties to paramilitaries and violence. And so FARC, the far left radical communist guerrilla, the Marxist-Leninist organization that's been fighting in Venezuela for a long time. So long that they were allied with the IRA. So a decent chunk of time. I'm glad that they're calling for all of the different fractured groups to unify against the United States and to help keep the Colombian people and government sovereign and free of U.S., maybe not influence, but U.S. control. And hopefully this will help steer the country into a real independent sovereign state in which Colombians, not Americans, and not American capitalists, get to call the shots in their country. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Google's AI overviews caught giving dangerous health advice. January 5th, 2026, via Futurism. In May of 2024, Google threw caution to the wind by rolling out its controversial AI overviews feature in a purported effort to make information easier to find. But the AI hallucinations that followed, like telling users to eat rocks and put glue on their pizzas, perfectly illustrated the persistent issues that plague large language model-based tools to this day. And while not being able to reliably tell what year it is, or making up explanations for non-existent idioms might sound like innocent gaffes that at most lead to user frustration, some advice Google's AI Overviews feature is offering up could have far more serious consequences. In a new investigation, The Guardian found that the tool's AI-powered summaries are loaded with inaccurate health information that could put people at risk. Experts warn that it's only a matter of time until the bad advice endangers users, or in a worst-case scenario, results in someone's death. The issue is severe. For instance, The Guardian found that it advised those with pancreatic cancer to avoid high-fat foods, despite doctors recommending the exact opposite. It also completely bungled information about women's cancer tests, which could lead to people ignoring real symptoms of the disease. It is a precarious situation as those who are vulnerable and suffering often turn to self-diagnosis on the internet for answers. Others were alarmed by the feature turning up completely different responses to the same prompts, a well-documented shortcoming of large language model-based tools that can lead to confusion. Mental health charity Mind's head of information, Stephen Buckle, told the newspaper that AI overviews offered very dangerous advice about eating disorders and psychosis, summaries that were incorrect, harmful, or could lead people to avoid seeking help. The risks could continue to grow. According to an April 2025 survey by the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center, nearly 8 in 10 adults say they're likely to go online for answers about health symptoms and conditions. Nearly 2/3 of them found AI-generated results to be somewhat or very reliable, indicating a considerable and troubling level of trust. At the same time, just under half of respondents said they were uncomfortable with healthcare providers using AI to make decisions about their care. A separate MIT study found that participants deemed low-accuracy AI-generated responses valid, trustworthy, and complete or satisfactory, and even indicated a high tendency to follow potentially harmful medical advice and incorrectly seek unnecessary medical attention as a result of the response provided. That's despite AI models continuing to prove themselves as strikingly poor replacements for human medical professionals. Meanwhile, doctors have the daunting task of dispelling myths and trying to keep patients from being led down a wrong path by hallucinating AI. On its website, the Canadian Medical Association calls AI-generated health advice dangerous, pointing out that hallucinations, as well as algorithmic biases and outdated facts, can mislead you and potentially harm your health if they chose to follow the generated advice. Experts continue to advise people to consult human doctors and other licensed healthcare professionals instead of AI, a tragically tall ask given the many barriers to adequate care around the world. Remember guys, the way that these language model AI programs work is they don't actually know anything. They're not, computers like you'd see on Star Trek. They don't know things. They are guessing machines. And what they are designed to do is do their best at answering your question. But their main job is to answer the question in the way that satisfies you. They're not necessarily designed to give you the right answer because that's not their job. That's not how they work, and they don't know anything. They are computer programs. But unlike, say, your calculator, which is always going to give you the right answer, unless I guess it's broken, these are not machines that are based on math exactly. Every single person who knows anything about computer science is going to laugh at that comment. But they're not based on, fact and truth. They're based on information that they can scrape online and then make a guess. So if you ask it for health advice, it's going to do its best to answer the question in a way that satisfies you, but it's not going to be able to give you a correct answer, or it's not going to know to give you a correct answer. If it does, it's entirely luck. And we really cannot rely on these for problem solving. Again, we've all seen, if you search, was 1990 37 years ago or whatever, it'll say, no, 1990 was not 37 years ago. 2026 minus 37, or I guess it would be 36 years ago, whatever. 2026 minus 36 years was 1990, so therefore 1990 was 36 years ago. Try that one at home. It's crazy. So, these are machines that they don't know anything. They do their best to guess at what you want to hear and then give you that answer. So we cannot rely on them for health advice. You cannot rely on them for very much. And I certainly don't rely on them at all. Personally, whenever I search something, I completely ignore the AI overview and go to whatever the first link or whatever is. because I straight up have no faith in the AI program. I think a lot of people, the reason why I bring up the calculator example is because I think a lot of people who, especially those who grew up with computers and calculators, assume that because it's a machine and because it's called AI and it's a big computer, they assume that it's designed to give you the right answer and that it giving you the wrong answer is a fluke. When in reality, it's not designed to give you the right answer. Again, it's designed to give you the answer that it thinks you want. So this is how, you'll get the occasional person with AI psychosis who will spend too much time talking to the AI, which is always trying to give them whatever it thinks they want to hear, and will learn from them and try to give them more and more answers that they want to hear, which, if you assume that the AI is correct, is going to lead you down a crazy path. So you cannot rely on it for health. Additionally, remember, health and medicine is a science, which means that it is prone to change. And that change could be pretty quick. So at the very least, just straight up searching up health problems online might give you outdated information. Of course, so can a doctor, So take that as you will. But it's always better to trust a professional or really an actual person than it is to trust an AI guessing machine. Because while your doctor is going to also, or may or may not guess, depending on, of course, what it is, they might be able to just run tests with proof. But, when a doctor is trying to diagnose you, they're going to do some guesswork. But their guesswork is not based on random guesses, but rather based on education and experience. So they're going to be able to actually put dots together rather than just invent dots wholesale and give them to you in order to satisfy you. So, trust your doctors, not the AI. And really, I don't want to blame people for relying on AI for answers, because I understand why and how people get there. And people don't know any better. Or, like the article says, people don't have the resources to see a doctor. Maybe you don't have health care. Maybe you live too far away from the doctor. Maybe you don't trust medicine because the doctor is giving you the runaround all the time. Maybe your doctor, the only doctor you have in your town is a quack. Or maybe you're the doctor and you don't know what's going on. I understand why people will turn to online, and things like WebMD and other such things have been a staple of people's health investigations, I guess, for years now. The Mayo Clinic has a pretty informative website, that kind of thing. But make sure that if the information you're getting at least comes from an actual professional and an actual doctor. Even if it is something that you're Googling online, make sure that information comes from an actual doctor on the Mayo Clinic instead of the AI chatbot that is generating something that it thinks resembles what a correct answer could look like. It's the same reason why you don't write essays with ChatGPT or whatever, because it doesn't actually read the book, and it's going to invent what it thinks is the correct answer. And that's exactly what happens if you try to use these programs as a doctor. We need significantly less faith in AI programs. And remember that they are profit-driven inventions by corporations. They're not designed to actually help the public. They're designed to create value for shareholders. So it doesn't even have your best interests in mind. And neither do the people who create it, which is why they're letting it, run free the way that it does in terms of healthcare. And some of this is really dangerous. If you get, it's talking about eating disorders. If you're getting the wrong information about an eating disorder, that can kill you. Or if the chat GPT or the AI program that you're talking to is reinforcing the, bad mental state that is contributing to your eating disorder, that's incredibly dangerous. So, make sure you're relying on trustworthy information that comes from actual people and actual doctors and scientists. And when I say actual people, I'm not talking about like RFK Jr. I'd probably trust the AI chatbot over RFK Jr. when it comes to matters of health. Because at the very least, the AI is trying to get the right answer, or pretending that it's trying to get the right answer, and RFK Jr. isn't even doing that. So talk to an actual professional who knows what they're talking about. And don't rely on the guessing machine to diagnose you. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Minnesota shooting videos challenge administration narrative. Policing experts question tactics. January 8, 2026 via AP News. The federal officer steps in front of the Honda SUV parked nearly perpendicular across a one-way residential street in Minneapolis, with snow piled up on the curb. Within seconds, he would shoot and kill the driver, Renee, a 37-year-old mother of 3. Federal officials said the officer acted in self-defense, that the driver of the Honda was engaging in an act of domestic terrorism when she pulled forward toward him, and that he was lucky to escape alive. Policing experts say some of the choices the officer made in that moment defy practices nearly every law enforcement agency have followed for decades. A dangerous decision to make. Videos filmed by bystanders from several angles show the Honda stopped on Portland Avenue just before the shooting. It's straddling multiple lanes, but not entirely blocking traffic. The driver's side window is open and the driver is waving their left arm as if to signal cars to go around. One large SUV drives around the front of the Honda and down the street. Multiple unmarked federal vehicles are idling on the road nearby. Some bystanders heckle officers. "Go home to Texas," one woman shouts from the sidewalk. "Why won't you let your faces be seen?" shouts another. Some blow whistles to alert neighbors immigration agents are in the area. Others honk. A gray 4-door Titan truck comes to a stop facing the driver's side of the Honda. 2 officers climb out and approach the Honda. Both officers wear what appear to be wool hats and black masks, covering their noses and mouths. A woman can be heard saying, "Go around." One officer says, "Get out of the car, get out of the fucking car." The Honda's reverse lights come on and it begins to roll slowly backward as one of the officers grabs the driver's side door handle and tries to pull it twice, then puts his arm into the open driver's window. A third officer, who had been out of the way on the passenger side of the car, then walks around the Honda's hood, stands just in front of the driver, and appears to be holding his phone up like he's filming. Why would he do that? Why would he put himself in a more dangerous position than he was already in? Asked Jeffrey P. Alpert, an expert on policing at the University of South Carolina, who called it absurd for an officer to use his body to try and block a 4,000-pound SUV. Darrell W. Stevens, former chief of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, also pointed to this moment as the baffling first step in a series of questionable actions that most police departments have discouraged for years. As a police chief, he prohibited officers from standing in front of cars in the early 1990s. "I can't explain why he would stand there and place himself in front of the car," Stevens said. "That's a dangerous decision to make." A 4,000-pound unguided missile. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem described the incident as an act of domestic terrorism carried out against ICE officers by a woman who attempted to run them over and ran them with her vehicle. An officer of ours acted quickly and defensively, shot to protect himself and the people around him. President Donald Trump said in a post on Truth Social that the ICE officer shot the driver in self-defense. Trump said based on the video, it is hard to believe he's alive. He said the driver viciously ran over the ICE officer. But it's unclear in the videos if the car even makes contact with the officer. The Honda starts to drive forward, its tires turning to the right as the officer stands in front. "Why doesn't he step out of the way? Why doesn't he move?" asked Alpert. The officer unholsters his gun. Within a second, he shoots into the windshield and then lurches backward and away from the car as it turns away from him. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has not publicly identified the officer who shot Good, but she spoke of an incident last June in which the same officer was dragged by a fleeing vehicle. Court records from that case identified the officer as Jonathan Ross. Most police departments long ago prohibited officers from shooting at moving vehicles except for very limited circumstances where there's no other option to save lives, experts say. And the reason is a good one, said Sharon Fairley, a law professor and criminal justice expert at the University of Chicago. If the officer is successful at shooting the driver, then you have a motor vehicle, a 2-ton vehicle that's not being directed, and it creates a huge public safety risk. The officer shoots a second time. By then, he's at the side of the car, an arm's length from the driver's side window. A third shot immediately follows. None of the other officers draw their weapons. The officer who fired the shot watches a car careen down the road and reholsters his gun. The street is quiet for a moment. 3 seconds later, the Honda crashes into a parked car with such force its tires fly off from the street. The pile of cars lurches forward several feet and snow billows. "Thank goodness no one is in the car she hit on the side of the road," Alpert said. Unfortunately, there were no kids playing out there and no one else got hurt. Alpert described the car at that point as a 4,000-pound unguided missile. People don't hit the brakes when they've been shot, Alpert said. There are pedestrians on the street. One video shows a woman walking a poodle. Drops of blood stain the snow. A pedestrian in a flannel shirt runs towards the crash. The officer who fired the shots walks slowly in that direction. Most of the federal agents remain with the unmarked vehicles. Drops of blood stain the snow. None of the agents immediately go to the Honda to render aid. A minute after the crash, the pedestrian in the flannel shirt is seen in the video leaning alone into the open driver's side door. A medic runs toward the crash site. Bystanders begin screaming. "Criminals!" shouts a woman. "What did you do?" A man bellows "murderers" over and over. Officers order everyone to get back. One bystander trains her camera on the officer who fired the shots as he walks away from the crash and towards his colleagues at the parked federal vehicles, telling them to call 911. He does not appear injured. "You!" she screams. "Shame! Shame!" He climbs into an SUV as a bystander shouts, "Don't let the murderer leave." The SUV drives away. Fairley, the University of Chicago professor, said the investigation into what happened here will have to examine whether the officer acted reasonably, both in firing his gun and in the moments leading up to it. It can weigh questions like whether the agent put himself in danger by stepping in front of the car, and if along the way there were other choices the officers might have made to avoid a death. The question is going to come down to is, was the officer reasonable in their belief that the driver presented an imminent threat of death or bodily harm to himself or to someone else, she said. It's really the legal question that has to be answered. The car's license plate, for example, was visible throughout the ordeal. One alternative, Fairley said, was to have just let her leave and go arrest her later. Within the last hour of this recording, another person has been shot by ICE in Minneapolis. This time a person who's alleged to be an illegal immigrant from Venezuela was shot in the leg after, again, allegedly attacking an ICE agent, and then they and one other person barricaded themselves inside a house. The person who has been shot is in the hospital and reportedly in stable condition. It seems that they were shot in the leg, and both have been arrested. Both the injured person and another person have been arrested. That's about all the details we have at the moment, but it just goes to show that the violence of the state has not stopped just because people are upset about it. And I have a feeling this is going to get a lot less of a response than the shooting of Renee Good. Renee Good being a U.S. citizen and a white woman, and the individual shot today being a Hispanic immigrant. Now, I could be totally wrong. You know, we could wake up tomorrow and things could be very different. So if by the time this comes out I'm wrong, I apologize. But, you know, I think 35 other people have been killed by ICE in the past year, and none of them have gotten the public outrage that this woman has. Now, of course, she was killed for no reason, but, you know, where's the outrage for immigrants, for non-whites who are killed by the white supremacist ethnic cleansing private police force, secret police force, you know? It's the public, even the liberals, are anti-immigrant, right? Again, it's what the Democrats all ran on in the last big election, was that they were going to be tougher on immigration because the American public have been encouraged to be racist, and their fears about economic insecurity as a result of illegal immigration, which borders on bogus, has encouraged them to embrace this fascistic ethnic cleansing campaign of Hispanic people from the United States. And so when ICE does its job and does exactly what it's intended to do, and people die in the process, as long as those people are the so-called undesirables, the general public might be dissatisfied, but they're not going to care as much. And that really is the crux of this matter. ICE does not need more training. Jonathan Ross did not shoot this woman because he wasn't trained well. He shot her because he was supposed to shoot her. ICE is supposed to be a terroristic military that occupies the country and ethnically cleanses people from it. It is supposed to be militant. It is supposed to be hostile. It is supposed to be murderous. The recruitment campaign itself runs on the idea that ICE agents are fighting a literal war against an invasion, and which we discussed last week. These are the kind of people that ICE wants, and this is the kind of people that the American government wants patrolling its streets on behalf of the U.S. presidency and their administration and the Republican Party, but also the Democrats as a whole. This is not an aberration. This is not an accident. The deliberate murder of this woman is the natural outcome of our allowance of both violent immigration policy, white supremacy, extraordinarily violent racism as institutional in the United States, and our permission of the state monopoly of violence against the worker. There's a lot of discussion about the use of violence. And so far, the right has monopolized that conversation, both through their usage of the military and police, and of course, now immigration, and the immigration enforcement as it has been since its inception, but also on the topics of carrying and the right to bear arms. But if, as we know from history, from the civil rights era, from reading and watching and learning, violence is not beaten by nonviolence. Because in order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. And the United States has no conscience. The United States does not cry when innocents are killed. That's why we killed 1.5 million of them in Iraq with zero consequences. That's why we've killed an alleged 70,000, but of course we all know it's well in the hundreds of thousands of people in Palestine over the last 2 years, to very few tears from the establishment at all. It's why we killed over 5 million people in Southeast Asia. It's why we executed a bunch of Cuban people and a bunch of Venezuelans just a few weeks ago last week, right? 2 weeks ago, in order to kidnap Maduro. We've been bombing their vessels, war on Iran, etc., etc., etc. The state monopolizes violence. All violence is owned by the state, pretty much, and is inflicted almost exclusively upon the working class, and especially in the global south, but even here at home, the working class. And our nonviolent approach, our nonviolent resistance, has so far amounted to angry parades. And that's about it. Where we see things change were with riots and with retaliation. Not a big supporter of the idea of gunfire in the streets. I'm not a big supporter of seeing people killed one way or the other. But you do the math, the numbers don't lie. And the way that we're going to get out of this is by forcing ICE out of our streets, off our streets, and out of our neighborhoods. That's not going to happen by people sitting around and singing and chanting or wearing frog costumes and trying to be silly for the camera so they can get hits on Reddit. It is entirely about action, decisive political action. These people need to leave our communities because they will kidnap your neighbors, they will murder your neighbors, and you very well may be next. And really, we shouldn't be doing it just because we might be next, but it is good to put it into perspective that they will eventually come for you if you give them reason to. And they're always going to be looking for reason to. So, actual solidarity with our immigrant neighbors, with our neighbors who are people of color and who are, mistaken for or racially profiled as threats to the community means actually defending them. And you can defend them only so much with the First Amendment. But when that fails, you have to defend them with the Second. Hey, if you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. Whistleblower drops largest ever ICE leak to unmask agents. The last straw, January 13, 2026, via Raw Story. A Department of Homeland Security whistleblower has released the identities of about 4,500 ICE and Border Patrol employees Tuesday, in what has been called potentially the largest agency data breach for the department. The killing of 37-year-old mother Renee Nicole Good by ICE agent Jonathan Ross last week in Minneapolis has prompted the leak of personnel date to the ICE list, an online database created to promote accountability by the masked federal agents, according to a report from the Daily Beast. The onslaught of national outrage reportedly led to the major leak. It is a sign that people aren't happy with the U.S. government, clearly. The shooting of Good was the last straw for many people, Dominic Skinner, ICE List founder, told the Beast. Information included in the new leak includes around 1,800 on-the-ground agents and 150 supervisors. Early analysis by the organization suggests that about 80% of the staff identified remain employed by DHS, according to the Beast. The first batch of names was slated to be posted on the site Tuesday night. Members of the public have reportedly also shared information about agents in hotels and even neighbors. I've had hotel staff sending post-it notes, bar staff sending DHS IDs, and loads of people saying they're neighbors and agents, Skinner said. Skinner told the outlet that he was working to verify the names. ICE and CBP are in clear need of reform, and I believe working for either is a bad move on a moral level, he added. The ICE leak link is in the episode description. Unsurprisingly, the ICE list has already been taken down. We'll see if it comes back up. You can still access it via the Wayback Machine or other people's screenshots, other such sources. We'll see if the website is up and running soon. When it was initially announced, they said that they were going to be hosting it in a non-US country. So, maybe it's just infrastructure problems. Maybe it is the United States interfering with it. But, federal agents, especially people who are going to be on the streets terrorizing our neighbors, their names and identities should be publicly known. I mean, your local police department has all of its members public. The sheriff is public. So, why are all these other guys allowed to be secret and private? ICE, I'm not going to give excuses for any other U.S. policing or military agency, but ICE can easily do its job with its members known, just as easily as it can without its members known, right? So doing the masks and the secret identities and whatever and lying about their jobs is not making their jobs easier. It just means that they don't have to face the social consequences. And that's part of why they're doing it. Number one, though, ICE is loaded with LARPers. These are dudes who want to pretend to be military, who think that one would hope anyway that that they think that they're doing the right thing. Obviously it's all a bunch of jerk-offs celebrating the power trip that they get from abusing people. A lot of them are white supremacists who just want to hurt brown people and immigrant communities. And they wear the masks and all that because they want to look cool and look hard and feel like secret agents. Really, they're a bunch of, I don't want to say goofballs, because that reduces the danger that they pose. But they're LARPers. They're like that guy who wears airsoft gear to pretend that he's military, even though he never served. It's the exact kind of thing, same kind of thing. So that's why these guys do it. But the other reason is they don't want to face the social consequences. They don't want to go home and have their neighbors, sneer at them. They don't want people to find their Facebook and, post comments like, hey, why'd you shoot that woman in Minneapolis? Because they know what they're doing is not popular. Even if people are going to, claim that they support ICE, the actual action that they take are so monstrous that the general public finds them unnerving. And the reason why people support them, and the reason why the people support things like killing Renee Good, is because they want their team to win. Now, the conservative guy watching Fox News at home projects himself onto the ICE agent. He sees the ICE agent as this masculine, powerful figure that's reclaiming, white heritage and power, because the Republicans and the conservatives all have this, fantasy that we're oppressed, we're so put upon because we have to acknowledge that pronouns exist or something because we never got past third grade. And so they see ICE agents as taking back their communities, and they see them as on their team, so they project themselves onto them. Like watching a movie and pointing at Ryan Gosling's character in Drive, and you're like, oh, he's literally me. It's that they do the same thing with ICE agents. And then they see Renee Good, who is a liberal blonde woman, who's gay, and at least in some capacity LGBT. And they see her as the pinnacle of the worthless liberal. She's interfering in ICE's affairs. She's the stuck-up woman. She's all this other stuff that's homophobic and misogynistic. She's the mom that told them to go to bed instead of playing 5 more minutes on the DS. She's the third grade teacher that told them to, sit in their seat and actually pay attention to math class. She's the person who scolded them for using homophobic slurs and saying, no, you have to be inclusive of all people. She physically, through her physical appearance and through her role in the narrative, is a stand-in for liberalism. And again, the ICE agent is a stand-in for conservatism, the strong masculine ideal. And so much of the conservative identity is driven by hatred of women and this superiority complex, and also an inferiority complex. Surprising, the conservatives, despite not being complex, have a lot of complexes. And so when they see this woman get shot, they cheer, not because they actually care, and not because they think that this guy was actually defending himself, not because of any of the reasons that they're going to say, which they all know is untrue, but it's because they like to see their team win, and they get sick satisfaction from seeing a person who they assume represents, or they have applied the representation of things that they dislike, get killed. She's a woman who is interfering with a man's violent business, and that's all it takes. I do legitimately think that if Renee Good had been a man, he probably wouldn't have been shot. I guess I could be wrong about that, but I think it is interesting that we have a young woman who, again, looks like the very stereotypical liberal, and she's the one who gets shot in the face for doing, nothing wrong. So, the guys who are going to think and act like this and be given guns and be encouraged to do as much violence as possible, and, as we know, are not really going to face any retribution for it, should be made known to the public, so that way the public can enforce that retribution for us. We have to, I want to say police our own communities, but we have to watch out for our own communities, and we have to watch out for our neighbors, because we know that the state isn't going to do so. And when we have violent thugs like ICE agents running around killing people with impunity because they're mad that mommy told them to go to bed 30 years ago, well, we're going to have a real problem if we don't get these guys out. This week's book recommendation is How Nonviolence Protects the State by Peter Gelderloos. It describes how exclusively nonviolent responses to state abuse allows the state to maintain its course through holding a monopoly on violence. Cuba vows to defend itself against Trump to the last drop of blood. January 11, 2026, via Common Dreams. President Donald Trump was ripped by humanitarians and anti-war voices on Sunday after he again threatened Cuba by saying the U.S. military would be used to prevent oil and other resources from reaching the country. Threats that come just over a week after the American president ordered the unlawful attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores. Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel rejected Trump's latest comments and threat of military force, saying the island nation was ready to defend itself. Cuba is a free, independent, and sovereign nation. Nobody dictates what we do, Díaz-Canel said in a social media post. Cuba does not attack. It has been attacked by the U.S. for 66 years, and it does not threaten. It prepares, ready to defend the homeland to the last drop of blood. Progressive critics of the U.S. president were also quick to hit back. Medea Benjamin, co-founder of the anti-war group Code Pink, said the true extortionist in this situation is Trump himself, as she detailed the mutual benefit of the relationship between the Venezuelan and Cuban governments over recent decades. What is extortion? Benjamin asks. It's what Donald Trump is doing. Taking oil over those oil tankers, confiscating 30 to 50 million tons of oil. That is extortion, and saying to Venezuela, we are going to run your country. Donald Trump is the greatest extortionist our country has seen. Reuters reports Sunday, citing shipping data, that Venezuela has been Cuba's biggest oil supplier, but no cargoes have departed from Venezuelan ports to the Caribbean country since the capture of Maduro. Speaking with CBS News on Sunday, Rep. Maria Elvira Salazar of Florida said that Trump threatens to strangle the people of Cuba by enforcing a resource blockade were like magical in her ears and those of her right-wing constituents who live in Miami's largest community of Cuban exiles. Welcoming Trump's efforts to bully Cuba into submission, Salazar claimed that Cuba's government is hanging out by a threat, she said, before correcting herself, a thread, I should say. Oddly but notably, Salazar continued her remarks by saying it was Cuba that has been an immense threat to the United States. As she described it as a nation with no water, with no electricity, they have no food or nothing. So if you think Maduro is weak, Cuba is even weaker. And now they do not have one drop of oil coming from Venezuela. But progressive voices opposed to Trump's authoritarian violations of international law, his bullying of allies and enemies alike with claims that the U.S. can do whatever it likes in the name of national security, and claims of natural interest, are warning that the threats against Cuba and other nations represent a chilling development that must be met with international opposition and condemnation. The U.S. blockade of Cuba is the longest-standing act of collective punishment in the world, said David Adler, co-general coordinator of Progressive International, pointing to Trump's remarks. It is condemned by the entire international community every year at the UN, and now the U.S. president is doubling down on this cruel and illegal punishment. Enough. This is an emergency, Progressive International explained in a dispatch last week, warning about Trump's overt hostility towards Cuba, Colombia, and Mexico, and other nations in the wake of the U.S. attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of Maduro and Flores. The United States is rapidly escalating its assault on the Americas and the principle of self-determination at large, warned the International Advocacy Group. Under the banner of the Monroe Doctrine, Donald Trump and his cronies are leading a campaign of imperial aggression that stretches from Caracas to Havana, Mexico City to Bogota. Cuba is a lot like Haiti, in the sense that they're one of the very first countries in the Western Hemisphere to completely buck imperial authority and have been ruthlessly punished ever since for it. The blockade of Cuba has been ongoing for literal generations now, ever since the liberation of the country by the United States, even though the UN has condemned it every single year. Of course, we all know that international law isn't real. International law exists only to punish the global south and in order to preserve the power of the global north and of the west. But, you know, even when the world comes together and says, hey, this is wrong, they're not going to do anything about it, and the U.S. just doesn't have to listen. The problems that Cuba faces at home are exclusively the fault of the United States, from their blockades, their sanctions, and their oppression. You know, the United States blocks them from getting things like medicine. And the Cubans, for their part, are an incredibly resilient, incredibly brave, strong, and intelligent people, like everybody else on the planet. But unlike everybody else on the planet, they've been given the opportunity to pursue that as a working class. And they're not put upon by the bourgeoisie the way the rest of us are. And so they've developed some incredible advancements in medicine that, despite the blockades and despite the embargoes, have been revolutionary. I mean, they have a vaccine against lung cancer, for example. Their primary export is doctors. Cuba will send tons of young people to school, will learn to be doctors, and then they go all over the world to help communities that don't have access to good medicine, especially in the global south. They also are very deeply committed to actual anti-imperialist revolution. That's why Cuban soldiers were found in Angola during the liberation of Angola from the Portuguese. That's why they were found in Venezuela most recently when they were killed by the United States. And Cuba is put upon because they represent the independence from the U.S. empire. And that is why the United States has sought to crush them ever since. Because if Cuba's revolution can be allowed to succeed, and it did succeed, then it proves that the working people of the world can liberate themselves and make a better world for themselves. And if they can do that in Cuba, why can't they do that in the United States, in Canada, in England, France, Germany, Poland, or anywhere else in the global south that the United States rapidly exploits? Congo, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, etc., 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 etc. So the United States has to keep them down. Plus, with it being just 90 miles from the United States, Cuba is an embarrassment to the U.S. imperial order because it shows that the United States does not have full, complete grasp over everybody like it wants to pretend it does. You know, it can make excuses. Well, Vietnam's all the way on the other side of the world. But Cuba's right there. And the imperialists can't get it. The United States can put a man on the moon, but they can never put a man in Havana. And so the United States is looking to crush them. With the recent success in Venezuela, that leaves only, like I said earlier, 3 countries, maybe 4, in South America that, I guess Nicaragua isn't in South America, in Central North America. But it leaves a handful of countries that are weak enough to hit, but are left-wing countries, Cuba chief among them. And it's always interesting to see the gusanos, the worms, the vile creatures that came out of Cuba after its independence, crying for the United States to put their bourgeoisie and plantation-owning selves back into power there, to see them complain about Cuba, you know, oh, Cuba's such a big threat to the United States, and then they brag about, oh, Cuba's communist, so that's why they have no water or food or oil. But it's the same fascist reasoning as always. Our enemies are an existential threat to our existence, but also weak and cowardly and pathetic little creatures, right? That's what they say about everybody. So the gusanos are particularly barbarous, I find. Just the scumbags who are the descendants of sugar plantation owners who realize that, oh, either I have to, turn the means of production over to my workers, and then just become a normal person, or flee the country with my wealth, which is what a lot of them did, or are, former casino owners and gangsters who ran Cuba before the revolution. Chief among them is Ted Cruz, who's very funny in this regard because he'll complain about how evil Cuba is and how it tortured his dad, and then point out that it's actually Batista, the U.S.-backed dictator of Cuba that the revolution overthrew, who committed all those crimes. So, I don't know. But Trump is brash enough and dumb enough to think that his success, if you'll call it that, in Venezuela means that he can invade and attack Cuba. The difference is that the Cuban people, I'm not going to say the Cuban people wouldn't allow it, unlike the Venezuelan people. I don't want to put down the Venezuelan people like that. In his point of view, he has not realized that Cuba has been resisting the United States for 66 years and will do so until its last dying breath. As the president said, they will fight to the last drop of blood because they'd rather die free than live as slaves to the U.S. empire again. Hey comrades, remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. If it makes sense for you, start every day this week with at least 20 push-ups, or as close as you can get. Judge dismisses lawsuit calling for evacuation of Palestinian Americans in Gaza, January 9, 2026, via Middle East Eye. The judge said she had neither the ability nor the resources to take on foreign policy decisions. A federal judge dismissed a lawsuit on Thursday accusing the U.S. government of failing to rescue Palestinian Americans and their family members trapped in Gaza. Chief Judge Virginia Kendall of the U.S. District Court in Chicago expressed sympathy with the impossible positions in which many of the plaintiffs have found themselves, but she said she did not have the ability and tools to evaluate foreign policy decisions made by the government's executive branch, Reuters reported. Kendall said she lacked the diplomatic resources to coordinate the evacuation of plaintiffs and/or their families with other nations, or the ability to rescue people from war zones, especially given the lack of U.S. diplomatic presence in Gaza. Endeavoring to answer these questions, and many more like them, from the comfort of chambers is both undoable and would also invade the political branch's constitutionally committed tasks of determining when, how, and under what circumstances evacuations from war zones should proceed, Kendall wrote. A group of 9 Palestinian Americans, who were either trapped in Gaza or had relatives there, filed a lawsuit with support from the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, and the law office of Maria Kari against the Biden administration in December 2024, accusing it of abandoning Americans of Palestinian origin during Israel's 2-year war in the enclave, which has been recognized as a genocide by the United Nations, human rights groups, and genocide scholars. The lawsuit called on the government to conduct emergency rescues of Palestinian Americans in Gaza. Over 71,000 Palestinians have been killed in the enclave, with numbers increasing daily due to Israel's ceasefire violations. The plaintiffs say they have tried for months to use all non-legal means to either escape Gaza themselves or help their immediate family members escape. The lawsuit said the U.S. government failed to implement standard efforts to evacuate Americans and their families from Gaza, thereby violating their constitutional rights to equal protection by abandoning them in a war zone and not evacuating them as readily as it would other Americans. The plaintiffs said that their lives had been turned upside down, and the lack of adequate shelter, food shortages, medical care, and turmoil meant that the government had a duty of care to evacuate them. According to CARE, each of the plaintiffs is eligible for evacuation by the U.S., but has been summarily ignored by the State Department and other Biden administration officials. The law requires the U.S. government to protect Americans wherever they may be. With every passing day, the danger of our clients dying from Israeli bombardment or starvation and disease, now rampant in Gaza, only goes up, lead attorney Maria Kari said at the time of filing the lawsuit, Middle East Eye reported. Is anyone surprised that the Biden administration thought that some Americans were less valuable than others? I'm certainly not. The Biden administration put out a statement early on that any American killed was going to be avenged by the United States. And then they clearly demonstrated that Palestinian Americans were an exception to this. They don't care about the lives of Americans. They care about the lives of white Americans. They care about the lives of rich Americans especially. But the United States, and Joe Biden personally, does not give a shit about Arabs, or about Muslims, or about Palestinians in particular. That's why Biden was more than happy to run a genocide for 2 years, and then hand it off unquestioningly to his successor. And there's a reason why the transition from Biden to Trump saw no material change in the Palestinian struggle from the United States. It's because the eradication of the Palestinian people, their oppression, their genocide, and their ethnic cleansing is an American imperial project, and it doesn't matter what color tie the president wears. They're going to be doing the exact same thing. Harris promised to do the same thing as Biden. And so when Americans who are Palestinian need help, the U.S. will turn a blind eye because they do not care about Palestinians, because they benefit from the genocide and it's what they want. So if that means a couple of Americans are going to get thrown into the dustbin alongside them, no big deal. That's why, Rachel Corrie could be murdered by the IDF, crushed with a bulldozer. And the United States has done nothing about it. It's why Shireen Abu Akleh can be murdered by Israel. And then her funeral procession attacked and her pallbearers beaten by the IDF while they're carrying her casket. Not a peep from the United States. It's why an American teenager can be shot and killed by Israeli settlers in the West Bank, and the United States doesn't bat an eye. I believe Abu Akleh might have been killed under Trump. Might have been or maybe that was Biden, 2021. But the teenager and Abu Akleh killed under Biden. These people in Gaza now looking to get out of the genocide that the United States is running. The United States chose to run, getting no help from the Biden administration because the Democrats are rabid, racist, violent imperialists. They do not care about Palestinians. They want to see them killed, and they want you to support them doing it. It's why they will continue to do it and then try to make the election about culture war issues. If you vote for Trump, where he's going to oppress women, and we're not going to, as if the capitalist order isn't going to oppress women, we're just going to be a little bit kinder about it. And then either way, that way you say, my rights are going to be, I'd rather have rights guaranteed by the mass murder of Palestinians than rights not guaranteed, than not have rights that are guaranteed through the mass murder of Palestinians. Either way, your options in November 2024 were genocide of the Palestinians or don't vote for the Democrat or Republican. And I hate to relitigate the election over and over and over again. I've been doing it the last couple of weeks, but it is really important for a lot of us to understand that this is that the genocide is a bipartisan issue that is supported by both parties. We don't have a good party and a bad party here in the United States. We have fascism today and fascism tomorrow party. We have the white supremacists and the white supremacists. We have the Ku Klux Klan on one side and the Ku Klux Klan but with a smile on the other. The fox and the wolf. Well, the wolf and the fox. We have, the Red Party, which wants to kick out all the immigrants, kill all the Palestinians, create a Christian nationalist state. It's only for straight white men. And we have the white supremacist, fascist, anti-immigrant party that wants to create a fascist government for everybody, but under the subject of the rich aristocracy, right? So we have the evil, or we have the cruel fascists and the kind fascists. Which one do you want? Both of them aren't going to help the people. Both of them are going to oppress the people, and both of them are more than willing to oppress, particularly the Palestinian people. But all that aside, the attacks on Gaza have not stopped. There is no ceasefire. There's no meaningful ceasefire. There's only an agreed upon ceasefire that isn't actually happening because Israel is continuing to bomb and attack Gaza with impunity, while the United States and her citizens pretend that it isn't happening, all while Palestinians continue to die. There's a reason why we continue to say, 70,000 people dead, even though 70,000 people dead have been the kill count, the death toll, I shouldn't say kill count, the death toll for the last 2 years. I remember in December of 2023, the official death toll was at 35,000. Yeah, December 24th, I created a sign that said the death toll was 35,000. as given by the Health Administration. We're over 2 years past that now, and the death toll has allegedly only increased. So from October to December in 1 year, 35,000, and then from December to December the next year, well, really 24 and then 25. So the next 2 years, another 35,000. You know, the math doesn't add up. And people are continuing to die day by day by the Israeli onslaught. So, you know, it's not a genocide. It's backed entirely by the United States for the benefit of the United States. So did I say it's not a genocide? It's not a ceasefire. It is a genocide backed entirely by the United States for the benefit of the American ruling class, military-industrial complex, and U.S. imperialism. And remember, if the United States determines that your ethnic group is inconvenient, they will not help you, and they will turn their backs on you, and they will let you be killed. It'd mean a lot if you join our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. Top DOJ officials resigned after being cut off from Renee Good killing probe, January 13, 2026, via Common Dreams. The Civil Rights Division exists to enforce civil rights laws that protect all Americans, one former DOJ attorney said recently. It doesn't exist to enact the president's own agenda. President Donald Trump's Department of Justice is seeing its latest mass resignation over its handling of the case of Renee Good, who was fatally shot by a federal immigration agent last week in Minneapolis. Days after Harmeet Dillon, an Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, announced that the agency's Civil Rights Division would not be investigating the shooting, despite the fact that the office's criminal unit would ordinarily probe any abuse or improper use of force by law enforcement, 4 top officials in the section have resigned. As MS Now reported Monday night, the chief of the criminal unit, listed on the DOJ website as Jim Felt, has resigned, as well as the principal deputy chief, and acting deputy chief. The outlet reported that other decisions by administration officials also contributed to their decision to leave. The FBI announced late last week that it would be probing U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent Jonathan Ross's shooting of Good, who was killed while sitting in her car on a street in Minneapolis where ICE was operating, part of a surge of federal immigration agents who have been sent to the area in recent weeks, with the Trump administration largely targeting Somali people. Despite video evidence showing that Good's wheels were turned away from Ross, who was one of a number of officers who had approached her car and reportedly given her conflicting orders, the Trump administration is continuing to claim that she purposely tried to drive into the ICE agent and that Ross fired defensive shots, something law enforcement agents, including ICE officers, are trained not to do in situations involving a moving vehicle. It is highly unusual for the Civil Rights Division not to be involved from the outset with the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office, as administration officials have aggressively pushed a narrative painting Good as a domestic terrorist, a designation that ordinarily would never be used by the government until a full investigation had been carried out. The FBI has blocked Minnesota authorities from conducting a probe, leading the state and the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul to file a lawsuit Monday. As the Washington Post reported Monday, the DOJ's Civil Rights Division would typically work alongside the FBI to guide investigatory strategy on a case like Good's. Prosecutors with the division were involved in trying the officers who killed George Floyd in Minneapolis and Tyree Nichols in Memphis. It is highly unusual for the Civil Rights Division not to be involved from the outset with the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office, Vanita Gupta, who led the division during the Obama administration, told the Post. I cannot think of another high-profile federal agent shooting case like this where the Civil Rights Division was not involved. Its prosecutors have the long-standing expertise in such cases. Hundreds of attorneys in the Civil Rights Division have resigned since President Donald Trump began his second term a year ago. Stacey Young, a former division attorney who left the DOJ soon after Trump was inaugurated, told NPR that the division is not an arm of the White House. The Civil Rights Division exists to enforce civil rights laws that protect all Americans, Young said. It doesn't exist to enact the president's own agenda. That's a perversion of the separation of powers and the role of the independent Justice Department. Dillon, who has said the division will work to carry out the president's priorities, said last April that she was fine with the mass departure of civil rights attorneys. The job here is to enforce the federal civil rights laws, not woke ideology, she said. Dillon's announcement that the division would not investigate Good's killing suggested that the DOJ's views that the DOJ views probing improper use of force cases as it has in the past as woke ideology. The mass resignation at the Civil Rights Division comes a month after more than 200 former DOJ employees signed an open letter condemning the near destruction of the DOJ's once revered crown jewel. The administration wants you to believe that the career staff who fled the division were actively in resistance mode and decided that they'd rather not do what their job requires them to do, said the former employees. That could not be further from the truth. We left because this administration turned the division's core mission upside down, largely abandoning its duty to protect civil rights. Now in the wake of Good's killing, said one observer, the division under Dillon's leadership refused to probe a murder. The people with consciences walked out. I'm going to be honest, I don't trust the Department of Justice to actually seek justice. So when all these people resign to protest the inaction of the Department of Justice on, violating civil rights, I don't get too upset, because the Department of Justice exists not to enact justice, but in order to, again, preserve the American ruling class. And sometimes the American ruling class has to be preserved by pretending to dish out punishment to people who act up, and in order to present an identity of law enforcement and of the Imperial stormtroopers who march on the streets, that there is a rule of law and that they aren't unaccountable, and that if they do bad stuff, the government's going to keep them in check. It's a big lie that they sell to the public in order to get the public to continue to permit this without riots in the streets. Now, that said, the little bits of justice that they do pretend to serve are better than nothing. And I'm not going to pretend that the people getting in trouble for murdering George Floyd or whatever was worthless or a grift in some capacity. I just don't think we should actually expect ICE to be ever punished for the crimes that they commit. And as we now can see, they're probably not going to be. The administration has no interest in actually punishing people for crimes that they commit on behalf of the state. And they use the big scary term terrorism again. And I can't reiterate it enough. Terrorism isn't real. You get a guy who shoots a CEO of a healthcare company in Manhattan. Oh, terrorism. But you get a bunch of stormtroopers running around beating up immigrants in Minneapolis, and that's just law enforcement. You bomb a foreign country, you irradiate Fallujah, you enact genocidal war on foreign peoples, you bomb weddings and hospitals and ambulances, and that's just combat. That's just war. That's just global policing. But a guy starts shooting back, and now he's a terrorist. Terrorism just isn't real, at least not in the way that the United States wants to pretend it is, right? And domestic terrorism is something that they use to justify extreme measures. A woman was in a car. That's enough. She's a domestic terrorist, now we have to execute her. And that's not to say that there aren't actual terrorists. There aren't guys who fly planes into a building or bomb Oklahoma City for white nationalist reasons or things like that. But that's to say that the label of terrorist is fixed to apply to enemies of the state, or people that they want you to believe are enemies of the state. As they'll call the Ayatollah a terrorist. He's not my enemy. They want me to believe he is, and they'll call Renee Good a terrorist. She's not my enemy, but they want me to believe she is, because if I will be convinced that someone's my enemy, then I'll be okay with whatever they choose to do to them, such as shoot her in the face 3 times for driving a car in public. If you ask me, an act of terrorism would be walking up to a woman driving a car and shooting her in the face for no reason. That's terrorism. And, even by definition of terrorism is violence done to coerce or scare people into political action. That's exactly what ICE does. It's an incredibly violent organization that's designed to terrify people into submission. ICE are terrorists who operate domestically. There you go, domestic terrorists. But that's what it is. And the fact that the Department of Justice won't even pretend this time that, we should look into this, just shows both that they're incredibly short-sighted, that they're losing sight of their own reality. They're a little bit too high on their own hubris, that they think that they can sell this to the American people and that the American people aren't going to question it enough for it to matter. Then they might be right. Very possibly they're just ignoring it and selling it as domestic terrorism to see how far they can get away with it. If they can convince the general public not to care too much about, blonde soccer mom getting shot in the face, then what else can they get away with? But it's also telling to me that the people are resigning over a lack of investigation into the murder of this woman. But when ICE kills other people, it's a shrug. It doesn't even make the news. When 35, I think it was 35 other people die in ICE custody. It's a shrug. It's it happens. It's what if they even acknowledge it at all. And it's only the fact that she was a white woman who did nothing that they're making a big stink about it. I don't know if people would be this upset if she were a Somali woman or if she were an immigrant. And again, I don't think she would have been shot if she were a man. So the Department of Justice and all these guys resigning, I think, again, I think it does show. I think that what it shows most of all is that they recognize that they're losing legitimacy and that they aren't even pretending anymore. And I think that people who have either legitimately bought into the system and are being now disillusioned, or people who know the reality of the situation but don't want to get caught in the sinking ship, are bailing. Hopefully this is a good sign that the ship is in fact sinking, and not that we're just handing more and more and more power over to the fascistic enterprise. Although I think that's probably the reality of the situation. But we'll see. And we'll see if anything even comes of this other than some protests for a few weeks. Personally, we'll see if ICE just decides to just kill more people and bury themselves under 40 atrocities instead of getting caught up on just one. It's what's worked for them in the past. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Meta lines up massive supply of nuclear power to energize AI data centers. January 9th, 2026 via AP News. Meta has cut a trio of deals to power its artificial intelligence data centers, securing enough energy to light up the equivalent of 5 million homes. The parent company of Facebook on Friday announced agreements with TerraPower, Oklo, and Vistra for its nuclear power for its Prometheus AI data center that's being built in New Albany, Ohio. Meta announced Prometheus, which will be a 1 gigawatt cluster spanning across multiple data center buildings, in July. It's anticipated to come online this year. Financial terms of the deals with TerraPower, Oklo, and Vistra were not disclosed. The Mark Zuckerberg-led Meta said in a statement on Friday that the three deals will support up to 6.6 gigawatts of new and existing clean energy by 2035. A single gigawatt, according to a general industry standard for utilities, can power about 750,000 homes. These projects add reliable and firm power to the grid, reinforce America's nuclear supply chain, and support new and existing jobs to build and operate American power plants, the company said. Meta said its agreement with TerraPower will provide funding that supports the development of 2 new Natrium units capable of generating up to 690 megawatts of firm power with delivery as early as 2032. The deal also provides Meta with rights for energy from up to 6 other Natrium units capable of producing 2.1 gigawatts and targeted delivery for 2035. Meta will also buy more than 2.1 gigawatts of energy from 2 operating Vistra nuclear power plants in Ohio, in addition to the energy from expansions at 2 Ohio plants and a 3rd Vistra nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. Vistra said that electricity from the 3 power plants, Beaver Valley in Pennsylvania and Davis-Besse and Perry in Ohio, will still run through the Mid-Atlantic grid for all electricity customers. It also said the agreements with Meta provide certainty for it to ask federal regulators for 20-year license renewals on the reactors. Tech companies have been under pressure in the stressed Mid-Atlantic grid, which includes Ohio and Pennsylvania, to build new power sources to supply the entire electricity needs of their new data centers there. Jesse Jenkins, an assistant professor of engineering at Princeton University who specializes in energy systems, said bringing Prometheus online without a new power source for it will only increase electricity rates across the Mid-Atlantic grid. Ratepayers in the Mid-Atlantic are already paying higher electricity bills to support new and proposed data centers. The deal with Oklo, which counts OpenAI's Sam Altman as one of its largest investors, will help to develop a 1.2 gigawatt power campus in Pike County, Ohio, to support Meta's data centers in the region. The nuclear power agreements come after Meta announced in June that it reached a 20-year deal with Constellation Energy. Believe it or not, I'm going to take the opposite approach to this than you're probably expecting, or that you might even be thinking yourself. I like this. I think this is a very good thing to happen. And I'll tell you why I think it's a really good thing for Amazon to be investing so heavily in brand new nuclear power plants in Pennsylvania, but mostly in Ohio. One, increases power demand, or power generation, which can reduce costs for energy. That's kind of nice. Two, and more importantly, I love to see investment in nuclear instead of coal or gas. It's great. I mean, nuclear is not exactly a renewable resource, but it's a pretty clean source of energy. Nuclear is borderline magic anyway, and it's really, really cool to see more and more investment in this. I do think nuclear energy is the future. Pure renewables would be fantastic. I don't think we're going to ever make it. I think our energy demands are just going to be too high. And in the short term, nuclear power plants are a good thing. And I would really like to see more of them and less fossil fuel plants. I'd rather flick on my lights at home and know that it's not burning fossil fuels and dumping CO2 into the atmosphere. Just boiling water the good old-fashioned way with magic rocks. Perfect. And the more we build these, the more we can reduce our demand on fossil fuels. And the less we demand fossil fuels, the more that clean energy sources, and let's be real, nuclear energy is pretty clean. More that clean energy resources are going to seem tenable, with the decrease in fossil fuel consumption, the decrease comes the decrease in power of the fossil fuel industry, fossil fuel lobbying, which means that we can see some actual good change. Now, of course, the elephant in the room that must be addressed is the fact that it's doing this to power data centers and AI and what bullshit and all that, which is a problem. But we've already kind of covered about how bad AI is, and yeah, this really does suck. AI data centers and whatnot, drive people out of their homes, poison the water, suck up the water, poison the land and the air, all the stuff that we've covered on this show before. But if we're powering them with nuclear energy, what we can do then, and particularly nuclear energy plants that are going to be attached to the public grid. So it's not going to be the private infrastructure in which these nuclear power plants only power these things. It's going to be in the regular system that it'll be drawing power from, which means nationalization is going to be beautiful. Sure, let's let Amazon and all these other companies dump a bajillion dollars into building energy power plants and nuclear plants. And then let's take them. Let's just take them. Same thing with the railroads. It's going to be a lot easier when eventually Union Pacific buys every single railroad in the United States. It's going to be so much easier to just take Union Pacific than it will be to take 60 different railroads. Let's just take these power plants once they're done. billionaires all paid for it. And obviously that means that the workers paid for it just through a roundabout way. Technically, the workers got robbed, and then the robber took the money that they stole and built the power plants, and then the workers just take the power plant. It's all fair. I think that's an even deal. And then we behead the robber. Works for me. And so that's what I'm looking for. I see this, and I see corporations building. Again, I'm not going to say nuclear is clean energy, but for all intents and purposes, they're building clean energy resources in an area where electricity costs are already going up. And then we can just take them. I don't know. I get excited about this. I see really nice future for this. And they're not going to be ready for a few years. So we got time to prepare and plan. And honestly, I don't think we're going to be ready to nationalize energy relatively soon by then. So it'll be nice to see them all built, and then we can just take them after they've been in operation, all the kinks have been worked out. Great. If we take them tomorrow, it's going to be like we're going to have to build them. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And as much as I'm really not looking forward to, private capitalist enterprise that already owns like half the country, building nuclear power plants. And I guess there's always the concern that they're going to cut corners or whatever. But I don't think the national regulation, under Trump, the national regulations on that, but I remain optimistic. The nuclear power plants more nuclear power plants are objectively a good thing for the energy needs of the United States. And we'll talk a bit about nuclear power. Yeah, nuclear waste is a bit of a problem, but you can store it relatively safely. And the chance of a meltdown are so incredibly low that it's really not even worth considering. If they're being built correctly, and they are, well, I guess these ones I don't know, but the ones we have been built correctly. And as long as they're maintained and staffed correctly, which they mostly are, we're not going to have a problem. France is like, 98% nuclear, and they don't have a problem. There's been one significant meltdown in world history. 3 Mile Island was a minor meltdown. Fukushima was an aberration in the sense that it was caused by an act of God, if you will. It wasn't caused by negligence. To my knowledge, I guess I actually don't know. Maybe they built it poorly. But we've had, one serious incident in the United States. There's been one catastrophic incident in the world. And honestly, that was handled pretty well, all things considered. They say the Soviet Union was the only place in the world that Chernobyl could have happened, but they also say the Soviet Union was the only country that could have actually handled the Chernobyl meltdown, and they did. So, nuclear power plants in Ohio and Pennsylvania are not going to turn into Chernobyl. And Ohio already had a catastrophic environmental catastrophe with the East Palestine rail disaster. So I feel like that they've already had that poor luck. It's unlikely to happen again. So yeah, by all means, Bezos, build your stupid nuclear power plants, and then we'll come and take them. And that'll be that. We'll get more energy, cheaper, and owned by and for the people. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.